Weliki ishku hakesna haiki. This is the Lenape in the Unami dialect for Mother Earth Day. So I welcome you all in Lenape to this conference, Weliki ishku hakesna haiki. This is the land of the Lenape. For over 20,000 years, they've documented human interaction with the environment here in the Delaware River Basin, which is the area where Lenape language was spoken and where the people were strong and believed in the sacred life of all living things. So here in Lenapehoking today, we have quite a few tribal entities. We have state-approved tribes that never left their homeland, based in Mahwah, New Jersey, in Bridgeton, New Jersey, in Millsboro, Delaware, and in Cheswell, Delaware. These 4 tribes have state recognition, as I said, and they've never left their ancient homelands. These 4 tribes do relate to the Delaware River as their mother river, Hakesenisipu, and respect the relationship with all living things. They do not consider natural, quote unquote, resources. They consider them relatives and respect their relationships as sacred. I would like to read a short Thanksgiving address and then introduce Chief Quiet Thunder Gilbert, who is here today. Chief Coker could not be with us today, but Chief Quiet Thunder is with us and by phone. And so I'm going to turn it over to him, but I wanted to read a very short message, and I'm having a hard time looking at it on my phone, but I'll just tell you, it's a message that we found among the Ojibwa people north of us. They're in the same Algonquian language group, the same family of northeastern woodland tribal people, and they greeted every meeting, every time there was a gathering, they greeted with thanks, first to Mother Earth, and it was called the Thanksgiving Address. And then they greeted each of their relatives, the tree people, the two-legged, the winged, the fish, the finned people, the tree people, and greeted every one of those relatives. So now I'm going to greet Chief Dick Quiet Thunder Gilbert, and he's here on the phone with me. Let's see how loudly he comes through. Here you go, Chief Gilbert.
Hello.
Can you hear that?
Very, very faintly.
Go ahead and speak up, Chief Gilbert. Wait just a minute. I'm going to try something else, Chief Gilbert. That's not loud enough for us. Just a minute. Okay, try it now.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Quiet Thunder speaking. Am I coming through?
Yes, that's beautiful.
We've always known that all things are connected. And we've also known that we have a sacred obligation to protect Mother Earth. Mother Earth takes care of us, and we have this sacred obligation to take care of her. We only get this one Earth, and now the Earth has many wounds, and we still have time to heal those wounds. We have to understand that if we don't, then we're sealing off tomorrow's world. And that's not fair to the generations that haven't come yet. Earth Day should be every day. Every day. Today here in Delaware, it's a windy day, warm sunshine. The birds are very active, building their nest. And you can see that Mother Earth is reawakening. Our young ones are entitled to see that, not just today, but each spring. It's not fair for us to seal that off. If we continue to ignore what is happening, then there won't be a spring reawakening. I won't talk much longer, but I want everyone to understand that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. If we do not start to respect Mother Earth and the balance that is required, that we have the key to it, then tomorrow's world will not come. No peach Kanaiaway.
Peach Kanaiaway, Chief Quiet Thunder. So we thank you, Wanishi Wemi, and feel free to stay on the call and listen as long as you'd like.
Thank you so much. So very, very much an honor, an emotional honor to be able to hear from you, Chief. So I just want to go through a little bit of today's outline. So we're going to have a few. Oh, hold on. Sorry. All right. So we're going to have a few breakout sessions in which everybody will be able to speak with one another and reflect. Our first one is just going to be an introductory. You're going to have about 3 or 4 people in your room. And what we want to do is just kind of introduce yourselves to one another, your name, if you're representing an organization or you work with an organization. And then we thought, what would be, a cool icebreaker would be, what is your favorite wild place? And that can be in Delaware, that could be anywhere in the country or not in the country. And so what we're going to do now is kind of go into those breakout rooms. After you come back, we're going to hear from our first speaker, who is Adam Rome. He actually wrote a wonderful book on the history of Earth Day. We'll then hear about transportation and climate change and the relationship between the two. Then we'll have another minute for reflections on that before we move into our headline speaker. Nea was not able to make it today. Something came up, but we have Jameelah from the National Sierra Club, who is going to, Jameelah Muhammad, who is going to speak to us about kind of the intersection between environmental, racial, and social justice and how we can advocate appropriately and respectfully in those spaces. She has done work all over our region on environmental justice issues. And then we'll have another breakout session where people can reflect on what they just heard from that speaker. And then we'll be moving into our bike raffle, where we'll be picking our lucky winner of our electric bike that we've been selling raffle tickets for over the past year. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up all the breakout rooms. Again, what you're going to want to do is just introduce yourself, your name, if you represent any organization, and what your favorite wild place is. So I'm going to unmute everybody so that way you can go.
Welcome back from the breakouts, everyone. I am Beth Chagas, and I'm the current chair of the Delaware Sierra Club's Executive Committee. And for the past couple of years, I've been a full-time environmental volunteer. But before that, I was the communications manager for the Delaware Environmental Institute at the University of Delaware, where I had the great pleasure of working with our next speaker to organize the Lights, Camera, Earth Environmental Film Festival for several years. So Professor Adam Rome is an environmental historian who helped launch the Environmental Humanities program at UD. And he's now a professor of environment and sustainability at the University of Buffalo. He graduated from Yale University, studied at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and received his PhD from the University of Kansas. Adam is the author of books about the environmental movement, including The Bulldozer in the Countryside, Suburban Sprawl and the Rise of American Environmentalism, and The Genius of Earth Day, How a 1970 Teach-In Unexpectedly Made the First Green Generation. And that second book earned him the nickname Dr. Earth Day, and he has been in great demand around this time of year ever since. He recently recorded an Audible original course based on The Genius of Earth Day, and I'll put links to his books and that course in the chat while he's speaking for anyone who's interested in checking them out later. And we are really fortunate to have a slice of his time today on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So without further ado, please welcome my friend, Adam Rome.
You're unmuted, Adam.
Thank you so much, Dustin and Beth. Beth was my favorite colleague when I taught at UD. I was there for 4.5 years. I really loved it. And I wouldn't have left if my wife hadn't become the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Buffalo. And the film festival in particular that I did with Beth was the highlight of every year. And some of you probably were in the audience. I recognized a few of the names. While I was called Dr. Earth Day, I had 2 nicknames actually. So the other was Mr. Apocalypse. And we have really serious problems, and getting to a sustainable society is a big uphill climb. And part of my job, I always felt, was to try to get people to understand where the problems came from. What were the roots of the problems? That's really essential in order to understand what we might do to root them out and to make progress. But whenever I, you know, as we all do, would feel some despair about where we're at and how far we still need to go. For me, Earth Day always was an antidote. Earth Day always makes me feel better when I think about what happened in 1970. And it's really amazing as a demonstration of what collective action can do. And that's inspiring. We really, now more than ever, need collective action. This is a tough time. And let's be honest, few people are focused on climate change right now, even though today is the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day. 3 months ago, though, was really different. Climate change finally seemed to be becoming a must-address problem. The Democratic candidates for president competed to offer aggressive climate plans, and young activists were bringing a no BS passion to the issue. But then the coronavirus smothered the fire. And it's likely to be the case for the foreseeable future that the pandemic is all people will really be thinking about. So what should environmentalists do as the world focuses on a pandemic that's killing people, crashing the economy, and upending daily life? I think the answer is lay the foundation for a broader, deeper climate movement. Take time out, take a pause, and think about what that would require. I think it requires 2 things: engaging people who don't see themselves as environmentalists, and deepening the commitment of people who already recognize that climate change is a problem, but aren't yet acting with any urgency. And in that effort, I think the first Earth Day can really be a model. The 1970 event made protecting the environment a national priority. It involved millions of Americans in an unprecedented public debate about what people had just started to call in 1970 the environmental crisis. It empowered a generation of do-it-yourself activists who made change in almost every part of society for decades to follow. Though Earth Day 1970 can't be repeated, I think its history offers important lessons about movement building. But learning those lessons requires debunking a persistent misconception about Earth Day as just a mass demonstration designed to generate attention. All of its iconic images are gestures of protest. In one often reprinted Earth Day photograph, a crowd surrounds a huge banner that shows the Earth shouting, "Help!" Another classic Earth Day image is a close-up of a young man in a gas mask trying to smell the buds on a tree. People conducted mock trials of the automobile for crimes against the environment and dumped dead fish at the offices of corporate polluters. But Earth Day's media moment soon passed, and we forget about this. But a week after the 1970 event made the environmental crisis a page one story, the US invaded Cambodia and protests broke out across the nation. 4 students were killed at Kent State. The environment quickly disappeared from the headlines. And if all Earth Day had been was a big demonstration, its influence would have been short-lived. But Earth Day's success was not just a massive show of support for the cause. It created a movement with staying power, including the ability to grow stronger despite the waxing and waning of media attention. By the end of 1970, the US finally had an Environmental Protection Agency and a Clean Air Act. And the next few years brought landmark legislation to clean up rivers and lakes, regulate waste disposal, and protect drinking water. And the early 1970s also saw the creation of a lasting eco-infrastructure outside of government. Activists formed organizations to keep the Earth Day spirit alive. Colleges and universities established environmental studies programs, and some of the first professors were Earth Day activists. Newspapers made the environment a full-time beat. Publishers brought out so many eco books, and again, many of them were by young eco activists, that bookstores created environment sections. Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin deserves much of the credit for Earth Day's movement building power. And unfortunately, he's not alive, so he can't receive all the kudos he ought to or talk about what he did, and I never got to interview him. But in September 1969, Nelson vowed to organize what he called a nationwide environmental teach-in in spring 1970. And his teach-in became a truly grassroots phenomenon. The first Earth Day was not a single event, but more than 12,000 across the nation. It was celebrated everywhere, blue states, red states, purple states. By some estimates, 20 million people participated. And even Gaylord Nelson did not expect that. But Nelson made 2 key decisions that gave Earth Day transformative power. And the first decision was implicit in the teach-in idea. He was inspired by anti-war teach-ins on dozens of college campuses in the mid-1960s. And he envisioned a politically charged extracurricular debate about the degradation of the environment. He believed that if Americans just stopped to think about pollution, they'd be moved to act. And he was right. Nelson's second key decision was not to be a micromanager. Nelson understood that his call to action would be more effective if he allowed ordinary people, if he allowed non-politicians to take ownership of Earth Day, to make it their event, not his. So he decided, and this was actually against advice he received. He was 53 years old. He was a pillar of the establishment. He didn't know how to organize anything like what he was trying to do. And the advice was to have something top down, very hierarchical, where he would be in charge of picking where events occurred and who participated and who led them. He said no. He said anyone could organize a teach-in, anyone could organize an Earth Day event, and the organizers could do anything they wanted. And as a result, the 12,000 plus Earth Day events had tens of thousands of organizers, and many decided afterwards to devote their lives to the environmental cause. And that was especially important, not just because of the sheer energy and talent and vision that they brought, but many had never before shown any interest in the environment. Earth Day had given them a new sense of mission. And again, you have to think back to 1970. Even the phrase environmental movement didn't get used, as far as I could find, until the run up to Earth Day. There were all kinds of activists working on particular issues. Obviously, the Sierra Club was around then. People working on sprawl or banning DDT or dealing with smog in cities, but they didn't have a sense that there was one big overriding concern. And there'd never been anything like the first Earth Day before. And without that precedent, the grassroots organizers had to do everything from scratch. And in the process, they gained the confidence and the skills and the contacts that they needed to make a difference in the years ahead. And very few organizations that you would have heard of organized Earth Day events. There weren't a lot of organizations to start with. So in most cases, a planning committee, an ad hoc planning committee, had to decide what kind of event to organize. And just imagining the possibilities required a crash course on the environment. It also required strategizing about tone and audience and inclusivity. And because most Earth Day events involve many activities, coordinating everything took organizational ability and political savvy to overcome bureaucratic roadblocks or diffuse potential opposition. At every step of the way, the local organizers learned a lot about themselves. Above all, I think they learned not to take no for an answer. And that sounds like a cliche, but in the interviews I did while researching my book, and I ultimately talked to more than 100 people that were involved in the first Earth Day, I was surprised how often people spoke about empowerment. The teaching gave me the sense that if you really wanted to do something, you could, a University of Michigan organizer told me. Just go ahead and do it. A high school organizer from Illinois was even more emphatic. After we tasted with success with this, she said, we were really empowered. That's a lesson that stayed with many of us throughout our lives, that we didn't have to just throw up our hands in despair. We could do something. And that can-do spirit was just essential. It was critical to the ultimate impact of Earth Day. In 1970, before Earth Day, the US did not just lack powerful laws to regulate pollution. The nation also lacked a strong eco-infrastructure, all the institutions that would forever change the way people think about their relationship to the environment. And those institutions couldn't be built by leaders in Washington. They couldn't be built even by leaders as magnificent as Gaylord Nelson. They had to grow from the ground up as the result of thousands of small and big decisions. And who would make those decisions? Before Earth Day, few Americans were professionally engaged with environmental issues. There really just weren't career paths. The only well-groomed career paths were sanitary engineering and natural resource management. But building sewers and regulating hunting and fishing were not enough. The do-it-yourself experience of organizing Earth Day events allowed many young people, and it was really mostly teens and 20-somethings who organized Earth Day. There were older people too, but people called Earth Day a youth quake because of so many teenagers and 20-somethings were involved. And their experience allowed them to become environmental pioneers. They created new jobs and careers. Some moved from project to project as freelance environmentalists. Some formed organizations, from community ecology centers to state advocacy groups. Other Earth Day veterans found ways to pursue their passion within traditional professions. They became environmental lawyers, green architects, eco-journalists, or environmental studies professors. A few even started eco-businesses, which definitely was not the thing back then. Many Earth Day organizers joined newly established government anti-pollution agencies. And of course, many went to work as lobbyists, researchers, media liaisons, and administrators in the rapidly growing environmental nonprofit sector. And most of those jobs basically were new too. The tens of thousands of grassroots organizers were matched by a stunning number of Earth Day speakers. This was something I never thought about before I started to do my book. But by my conservative estimate, at least 35,000 people spoke on Earth Day 1970, and most had never spoken publicly about the environment before. Students and professors did most of the speaking, but a host of others joined the conversation. Union officials, doctors, bureaucrats, poets, business executives, lawyers, civil rights activists, artists, ministers, feminists, politicians. That's an extraordinary collection of people thinking about the same issues. The Reverend John Claypool of Crescent Hills Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, was one of those first-time speakers. And his Earth Day sermon, I think, wonderfully illustrates the power of the event. 2 years ago, he began, I am not even sure I had heard the word ecology, and I certainly did not realize the gigantic proportion of the problems this word stands for. Since then, however, we all have been inundated about what may happen very shortly to this planet Earth, and whether we like it or not, we have to make some kind of response. Again, how can you get more powerful than? He never really thought about this, and now he says, we have to make some kind of response. The New York Times called the discussion at one teach-in soul searching. And I think that adjective deserves emphasis. Earth Day 1970 prompted many participants to ask deeply personal questions. How much do I care about pollution? What am I willing to sacrifice to protect the environment? What might I find fulfilling and even exciting to do for this cause? Pondering those questions often led people to change their lives, to rethink daily habits, to fight environmental battles, even to switch careers. As a senator, Gaylord Nelson understood the need for far-reaching legislation to protect the environment, but he did not insist that Earth Day events have a legislative agenda. He understood that his path wasn't the only way forward. And he also knew that he didn't have all the answers. He led by enabling others to lead. And of course, today, the political situation is very different than in 1970. Though a few far-right ideologues and politicians argued that Earth Day 1970 was a communist plot, Republicans as well as Democrats accepted the need to do more to protect the environment. Pollution, which was so many more times worse on the first Earth Day than it is today, at least in the US, was obvious. People might disagree about how to solve the problem, but no one denied its reality. And the opposition to action in 1970 also was not as powerful or implacable. Though business leaders complained about the cost of cleaning up pollution, no industry then had as much stake as the fossil fuel industry does now. And so I think those obstacles to reform only underscore the need to make wise use of the pandemic pause. And this is really the thought I want to leave you with. Even before COVID-19 changed everything, the climate movement wasn't strong enough. And business as usual isn't likely to change that. To broaden and deepen the movement requires new thinking. How can environmentalists create space for people on the sidelines to ask what a changing climate means for their hopes and dreams? And how can they encourage everyone on the field, people already involved, to do more in whatever way best suits their talent and temperament? Thanks so much. It's great to be back in Delaware again, even virtually.
To bring up the presentation for our next speaker, who is the wonderful and lovely Susan Love. let's see if I can figure out how to get the participants. There we go. So Susan works at DENREC and is going to be speaking with us about the impacts of transportation on the climate and how that correlates with climate change and what we can do about it. She has been working with in the environmental space for a really long time. It's just a wonderful advocate and great person to work with. So I'm really thankful that she was able to take some time out to talk to us about this conversation. All right, with that in mind, Susan, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and you can take it away when you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you, Dustin and Sierra Club and everybody for taking the time out on this beautiful Earth Day to speak with us and to have engagement with each other. It's truly wonderful to see so many of you here. And thanks, Adam, for such a great presentation and food for thought. And I do want to assure everybody here that although we are really, we're all dealing with COVID in a number of different ways, our team in the climate and sustainability section in DENREC is still focused on climate change. So you have our assurances there. Dustin, can you move the slide? Dustin, you're going to move the slides for me, right?
Yep.
All right, excellent. So it's been 50 years since the first Earth Day helped to catalyze significant environmental legislation in the US. And I really do just want to take a moment to reflect on the significant progress that has been made since that time of dense smog and rivers on fire. And as Adam pointed out, there is still so much left to be done. Rapid human-caused climate change was not really a key cry for action in 1970, but it is and should be now. So next slide. So as Dustin said, Dustin, move forward. Move it forward. There we go. Yep, that's right. As Dustin said, I'm Susan Love. I am the administrator for DENREC's Climate Sustainability section in the fairly newly formed Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy. The job of my small but dedicated team is to prepare the state for both the causes and the consequences of climate change and to create a sustainable future for us all. One key way we do this is by helping to promote programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, like our electric vehicle programs that I will be sharing with you today. As you all likely know, greenhouse gases are responsible for climate change, which will have significant impact to Delaware in the form of sea level rise, increasing temperatures, and heavy precipitation, and all of the secondary and cumulative effects that go with that. Our state has committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by at least 26 to 28% by the year 2025 from a 2005 baseline. And we are making a plan right now to meet that goal and move beyond. If you have not gotten engaged yet in our state's climate action plan, I encourage you to take some time to do that today and during Earth Week, and visit our website at declimateplan.org. Next slide for me. And thanks to Dustin for moving the slides along. I was not confident in my abilities to use technology. And Dustin, you're doing an amazing job being the technological wizard behind our day today.
At least I'm trying anyway.
It's going great, it really is. So for the past several years, my team has focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in particular, which accounts for 35% of our in-state greenhouse gas emissions. The other large component of our greenhouse gas emissions are from electricity production and industrial activities. But with fuel switching and rapid deployment of renewables, we have seen a significant reduction in emissions from electricity generation. But emissions from transportation remain difficult to reduce for a variety of reasons. While our program is really focused on clean transportation for greenhouse gas reduction purposes, it is important to remember that vehicle exhaust contains other harmful pollutants that lead to smog and lung damage. Efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, like those that my team are conducting, also have significant co-benefits for those other pollutants. Next slide for me. Reducing emissions, as I mentioned, from the transportation sector is somewhat complex due in part to the intersecting roles of the federal, state, and local governments and individuals and businesses. But it's also because of our reliance on vehicular travel here in this country. Vehicle miles traveled in the US increased from 1 trillion per year in 1970, first year of Earth Day, to more than 3 trillion in 2019. We drive a lot. And everyone plays a role in reducing emissions from vehicles. The federal government has a role through setting emission standards that must be followed by car manufacturers and by funding infrastructure and transit, among other efforts. Individuals and businesses play a key role through their consumer choices and behaviors. Manufacturers also play a role by making cars that are more efficient. I, unfortunately, am not in charge of all of these things, right? So state and local government also play an important role, and we really work to maximize the effect that we can have at the state level. Local governments play that role by zoning that leads to walkable and bikeable communities, and incentives and leading by example. Delaware is working on a number of such initiatives, but I'm going to focus down in on our work on electric vehicles for you. So, okay, Susan, why electric vehicles? Why do you keep talking about this? I've heard you talk about electric vehicles 16 times, right? And that's because deployment of electric vehicles is a major component of our plans here and across the globe to meet these greenhouse gas emission goals that we have set. EVs are clean with zero tailpipe emissions and using electricity sources that are increasingly fed by renewable and carbon-free energy sources. No tailpipe emissions means cleaner air, especially for those living near transportation corridors who might be disproportionately impacted by vehicle emissions. Here in Delaware, because of our mix of renewable energy and carbon-free energy, mile for mile, an EV produces less than 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions of a traditional car. And as we add more renewable energy to the grid, the overall emissions profile of fueling that car will continue to get cleaner and cleaner. For those of you, Charlie Garlow, who pair an electric vehicle with solar panels, you can drive completely on the sun. So in addition to the climate and air quality benefits, EVs are great for consumers. They are cheaper to fuel and operate, they are fun to drive, and they are technology forward. When I started working in this program in 2015, I knew nothing about electric vehicles or clean transportation. And as a result of diving in and working on this, I became a true believer. I've made the transition, and I can tell you, I am not going back to an internal combustion vehicle. So let's talk for a second about what an electric vehicle is, because there is some confusion out there because there's a mix of a lot of different cars. Battery electric or fully electric vehicles use only electricity to propel them forward or backwards. Plug-in hybrids go short distances on batteries that are charged by an external source. So battery electric and plug-in hybrids are cars that plug into a wall or something to get their fuel. Conventional hybrids like the groundbreaking Toyota Prius have small onboard batteries that are regenerated by the kinetic energy of the car. So our programs and the things that we're talking about focus on battery electric and plug-in hybrids, those that you can actually plug into an outlet. And this graph gives you just a quick representation of the tiers of vehicles. So you talk about them plugging in, Susan, but how does that actually work? So all plug-in vehicles can charge at a regular old 110 outlet, the same one that you would plug your phone into. This is a very slow way to charge your car, maybe taking 6 to 8 hours to charge 30 miles. Most battery electric vehicles rely on level 2 or level 3 charging. A level 2 charge still uses a 220 volt outlet for a faster charge, providing about 100 miles of range in 5 to 7 hours, depending on the car. These types of chargers are found in parking lots, garages, residences, my garage, and other places where cars might sit for a number of hours, either at the workplace or a shopping center or your own garage. DC fast charging is sort of an en route charging. This can charge 100 miles in about 20 minutes, depending on the car. So these are found along highways and would be used for electric vehicle drivers who are on longer trips, visiting relatives, going on vacation, and the like. Next slide, Dustin. There is a growing number of places to plug your car in Delaware and in the country and beyond. There are 176 charging outlets available today throughout the state, and our team and others are working to increase that number so that fueling an EV is just as easy or easier than pumping gas. There's a lot of places where you can view these. This map shows you all the dots are places that you can plug your car in. You can also see this on downloadable apps like PlugShare or going to the United States Alternative Fuel Data Center. Next slide. Since I haven't told you about our programs, but I'm going to tell you the results of our programs. Nearly 2,000 EVs have hit the road in Delaware since 2015, when our electric vehicle programs began. If you keep your eyes peeled, you will see one just about every time you are driving down the road. There are hotspots for EV ownership in northern Delaware and down at the beaches, sort of coinciding where our heaviest population density is. But we have EV owners in just about every zip code in the state now. Manufacturers have also promised an all-electric future, with manufacturers like Volvo and Volkswagen really going all in with electric cars. And there are more than 40 models of plug-in car available for purchase today, and some really exciting new ones coming within the year, we hope. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about our programs, and I want to move through this pretty quickly so that we have some time for questions. In 2015, DNREC launched the Clean Transportation Incentive Program. The program provides cash rebates for electric vehicles and charging stations, as well as for alternative fuel heavy-duty vehicles, but I'm just going to focus on electric for today. The cash incentive couples with federal tax incentives, and that really helps to reduce the initial cost of the electric vehicle for a purchaser to make the electric vehicle really a more cost-effective and feasible option for regular people. Cash rebates in the amount of $2,500 are available for purchase or lease of a full electric vehicle, and $1,000 for a plug-in hybrid. We work with our local dealerships as well to provide the rebate at point of sale, which reduces paperwork burden for purchasers. We also offer cash rebates for the purchase of electric vehicle charging stations that are used for the public, like charging stations at shopping centers or downtown destinations, for apartment complexes and for fleets. Rebate amounts vary, but up to 90% of the cost of the equipment is available. We also have a competitive grant program to incentivize DC fast chargers, so that we have more of these en route chargers for people who are going from point A to B. 23 rebates have been given out since 2015 for vehicles and charging stations. And this has helped catalyze the electric vehicle market and reduce range anxiety here in Delaware. The funding for this program comes from Delaware's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a cap and trade program for electricity generators. Electric vehicles are not the solution. They are part of the solution and part of our programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and must be paired with other strategies to be truly successful. I've highlighted, our rebate programs today, but there's many, many more things that the state is working on in cooperation with other state agencies, other states, and the federal government. But I don't have time for that today. So I just want to finish out by saying that we can't do this without you, right? This is our clean transportation team. Myself, Brianne Preeson, and Nicole Rohde, and that's it. That's our dedicated team. But we also need you. In order for us to reduce our transportation emissions, we need forward-thinking federal standards, auto manufacturers who are producing electric vehicles, and lots of renewable energy on the grid. But we also need you to be a partner in this clean transportation journey. Consider an EV for your next vehicle. Walk or bike when you can. Carpool and ride public transit. Reduce unnecessary trips. Razz your friends about their driving habits. Every bit that you do, coupled with what happens at the state, the federal, the local, and the global level, can help us meet our goals and create that sustainable future that we've been talking about today. So thanks so much for the opportunity to participate. Please check out our clean transportation website, de.gov/clean transportation. Call me, call Bree, call Nicole, and we're happy to answer questions if there's any time for that.
I believe we do have a few questions and a little bit of time. So just going to look through here.
So I will say, I see a couple, the rebates are not tied to income at all. So if you buy a vehicle if you buy an electric vehicle that costs less than $60,000, you will get that rebate. If you buy an electric vehicle that costs $120,000, we are no longer giving you an incentive for that. So we're really trying to incentivize the regular cars for normal humans. And you also qualify for the federal tax incentive. So the Delaware benefit is a cash rebate, and the federal benefit is a tax refund on your taxes next year. A lot of people get a little bit confused about that.
Do all car sales sell electric vehicles in Delaware, or do you have to special order them? Where can you buy electric vehicles?
That is a really great question, and it does vary. I believe, and I have Brienne is on the chat, so she's going to correct me if I misspeak. I believe that every major auto manufacturer now offers an electric vehicle, but some are not available for sale in the state of Delaware, and that's partially because manufacturers choose to send cars to states that participate in this special emissions program called the Zero Emissions Vehicle Program, which Delaware does not currently participate in. So there are models of vehicle that are not available for purchase in Delaware, but are available for purchase in New Jersey or Maryland who do participate in that program. That's not true for all manufacturers, but it is true for some of the fully electric vehicles that are offered by Hyundai and Kia, I know for sure.
A couple other good questions here. Has the state, in terms of transportation in general, has the state done anything in talking with county governments on land use decisions that would reduce vehicle miles traveled?
Sure, and that's another, that's about a 2-hour conversation. The state does have a role in working with local governments on walkable, bikeable communities. The Office of State Planning Coordination is engaged in that. The Department of Transportation is engaged in that. DNREC is engaged in that. We all try to work towards that future through comprehensive development planning, through partnerships, incentives. There are laws passed that try to help with transit development. And has that been hugely successful over the years? Maybe not, but we also need regular humans to want to live in denser locations and to ride transit for all of that to be successful. So it's partly government policies, but it's also partly people wanting those policies.
Right. One last question, and then you guys can chat it up in the group chat here after our reflection time. So if you don't have taxable income, can you transfer the rebate?
So like I said, the Delaware rebate is a cash rebate. So even if you don't file taxes or have any tax liability, you get the cash back from Delaware. The federal rebate is on your federal taxes. And I luckily am not a tax accountant, so my skills are not in that realm. If you have specific questions about that, we can talk to you offline a little bit. But in general, if you don't file taxes, you can't get a refund.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Susan. I hope you can stick around. Right. We are going to go ahead and get started back up. I hope everybody had a great reflection social session there. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Jameelah Muhammad is going to give us a great conversation about kind of the intersection between environmental, racial, and social justice and some of the experiences that she has had over her years in organizing. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Jameelah, and turn it over. You are good to go.
Okay. I was like, I don't see my mouse. I'm trying to unmute myself, but you unmuted me, so that works. So hello, everyone. My name is Jameelah Muhammad, and I am an Eastern Region Organizing Manager at the Sierra Club. I'm actually based in Connecticut, but I work with organizers in various communities in the Northeast and the Southeast who cover doing a variety of environmental campaigns from Maine to South Carolina. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what my organizers experience in the various states in which they work. Many of my organizers are not from frontline communities working on environmental justice issues. And so they are often entering into communities that are not familiar for them, or they may not share the same identity of the folks who live in those communities. And so there's quite a bit of work that they have to do before even entering the community if they decide that that's where we're going to focus for our work. And so some of the things I wanted to highlight are sort of a checklist almost of things that my organizers talk through with me when they're trying to figure out what's the best way to engage and to make sure that they are, one, coming with a level of awareness and historical information about what has been happening in those communities before they engage in the work. Two, really trying to get grounded in what the different needs are in those communities, which may or may not necessarily be an environmental need, and maybe it is. And three, figuring out what is their role exactly, and really trying to understand, you know, in certain communities where there is already existing leadership that may have been fighting the environmental issue for a number of years, maybe it's that they are being a good ally and support or advocate in a particular way, and being really sensitive to that. And then in other communities, they may not have been organized and fighting the issue for a number of years in a way where they've been very well resourced, or are just trying to figure out what their strategy is going to be. And so my staff have a lot of work figuring out how to really deeply partner with those communities to make sure that they are providing support and kind of walking that journey together. So I think one thing that is really important that I have seen oftentimes as one of the biggest issues, and if it's not done appropriately, is really, again, having that historical context of what issues have occurred in the community prior to our campaign. So for example, we, working with Beyond Coal, have worked in a number of communities that have been directly impacted by coal plants. So these are communities that they may reside right next to where the coal plant is. There's a number of air quality issues, a number of issues with water quality. And so sometimes there's an assumption about, you know, what those issues are, what the priority is. Maybe the priority is air, maybe it's water, maybe it's something different altogether. Maybe it's concern about losing jobs if the community transitions off of coal. So there's quite a bit of work to actually sit down with community members and understand what is going on, what has historically happened, what has the relationship been with the coal plant to the community members, and just any efforts, you know, before we've come to engage to address what's happening in the community. So that requires quite a bit of work, quite a bit of listening. We don't come in with a strategy and a plan that we're trying to plug folks into for what we're trying to do. We really want to just sit and really understand what has happened, you know, what resources can we provide, if anything, and just figuring out how to be a really good listening partner to the folks in those communities. And a part of that involves sitting down with community members, but also having conversations with all folks involved. So that might be trying to get a hold of the local labor union that operates the coal plant. That might mean talking to the local utilities to also get a sense of what's happening there. So it's really a broad spectrum of who we're having conversations with to understand the work. I think the other piece of that is then also understanding the cultural dynamics that are happening in the community, right? Understanding the racial, economic background of the folks that are there, different languages that might be spoken, different cultural customs that, you know, organizers may not be fully aware of, and really being sensitive to that and coming from a very humble place of really trying to learn and be open, recognizing that, you know, you shouldn't make any assumptions, and you're trying to figure out and learn as much as possible about the culture of the folks there and their experiences that they've had. And then I would say there definitely are some resources in how to go about doing this work. So one of the campaigns that my staff work on is called Ready for 100 with the Sierra Club, which is working in local cities and towns to get them to be 100% renewable energy by a specific date that the city or town identifies as ideal for them. And one of the tools and resources coming out of that work is a community dialogue toolkit, which really provides a lot of good examples of how to engage in a community dialogue with folks, have a lot of one-on-one conversations, but also bringing people together in a community space to figure out, you know, what are their needs, what are their concerns. And a part of it is also recognizing that when that happens, that sometimes it's not an environmental issue that comes up. Maybe it's a job issue, maybe it's a economic issue, or maybe it's a food security issue, right? There's a lot of different issues that could be happening in the community. In some of the communities where we've worked, it's been that the biggest issue maybe isn't necessarily the coal plant. They're actually fighting like a waste incinerator or the burning of trash in that community, and that feels really urgent to them. And then maybe the coal plant is also something that's important, but they want to address the incinerator issue as well. So having these community dialogues really helps get to the root cause of what some of the issues might be. And there's oftentimes a lot of different issues. Some of the issues might be anything from criminal justice issues, police brutality, immigration issues. So really in those community dialogue spaces, that's the time to really figure out like what are all the different things that the community is experiencing in addition to these environmental injustices, because ultimately we can't ignore those issues. We have to be educated on those issues as well and figure out what is our role to either support them as they're trying to have a variety of different issues that they're trying to address, often at the same time. So that is a resource to definitely look into, the community dialogue toolkit for sure, to kind of help navigate how to have those conversations. So I could talk all day about all the different ways to approach entering a community and all the different challenges that arise there. I will say, as far as what we have found to be particularly challenging when entering a community and not being sensitive to the different issues that are happening in the community, is that many times different community members will feel that they're not consulted when it comes to press and media, things that are happening. So really being sensitive and making sure that if there's any sort of, you know, opinion piece happening in a newspaper, any op-ed, if there's any folks that are talking to reporters or doing anything that's public facing, having really good relationships with community members before that happens is really important. Making sure that the right people are representing that particular issue or actually representing that community. They should be someone who's directly from the community, as ideal as possible, not speaking for other people's experiences, and just making sure that there's that community dialogue is happening and those relationships are being built so that those people can actually be the ones that are representing what is happening in their own communities and can speak about that. So there's definitely been a lot of, you know, challenges in the past where that hasn't been the case, and maybe like a staff member or a volunteer is speaking about the issue, and it really should be someone who is directly from that community. But, you know, until those relationships are built, and they have to be like authentic relationships, right? Like actual friendships, relationships that might not just be built on the actual campaign or environmental issue, like they're relationships that are like, I care about you as a human being, as a neighbor, as a person. How can I be with you in whatever fight it is that you have going on, whether it be this environmental fight or whatever the issue is in your community. And the more authentic that relationship is, the easier it is to then partner on a larger environmental campaign and to move that agenda forward, together. So yeah, I don't know how long you want me to talk about the various campaigns and things I've worked on. I live in an urban space personally. There's a number of issues in my community. We've had a study recently by our chapter in Connecticut on gas leaks within the city and the larger rate of gas leaks that are happening through that, as well as just, general air quality. We also have a trash burning facility in my community as well. So, I mean, this is layered on top of, obviously, a lack of infrastructure for, I think you were talking about electric vehicles, right? A little bit earlier, just a number of things where it's really important to understand where the community is at, as far as what are the most urgent needs, how can we support those urgent needs, but how can we also have conversations about how we can work in partnership for the long term. But I think I'll stop there and then see if there's any questions, unless you want me to talk more, Dustin.
Yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I know we have one question. I'm not from RuthAnn. I'm not sure if there's like a regional Sierra Club that's out kind of assigning work or anything like that. I guess it's more like an activist-based situation. How have you gone about, starting that relationship and figuring out where you can help in different communities? I mean, it seems like everybody's being kind of barraged with issues nowadays. How have you kind of started that process, I guess, would be the question.
Got it. I think it depends on the campaign. I would say we've definitely tried to prioritize communities that are the most impacted. So they either are in close proximity to some particular environmental hazard. But I'll also say sometimes what will happen is volunteers will raise their hand and we will come and provide some support, which I have seen actually happen a lot with the Ready for 100 campaign. So if there seems to be a lot of interest locally to kind of push that issue, and we're seeing a lot of people coming to us saying, oh, we really want to run this particular campaign, then we might provide some additional support in those communities. But I do think it's, we try and be strategic. Like we think of a number of things, right? We think some communities have a lot of things happening in them as far as political influence over maybe specific legislation. So we definitely want to do work in those communities. There might be a community that we have not engaged in very heavily, but is, seems like a community where we should be engaged for a number of reasons, because they may be impacted by something, they may not even realize it. But yeah, we usually do some sort of community mapping to try and figure out where we will try and invest resources and time. Let's see, and then it says, is voter registration part of what you can push for in local campaigns? So I am a part of the organizing department. Sierra Club has a number of different departments that work on different issues. We have a political team that does a very comprehensive electoral organizing component, and usually is very robust when there's an election year. So they'll be doing a lot of stuff this year as well. And some of the local chapters also do a lot of political work. They endorse specific candidates through the local chapters. And they can do, get out the vote work more broadly. So that absolutely is something that can be done. Usually my organizers aren't engaged in that work because their funding is very specific to a particular environmental issue, but it's definitely something that Sierra Club more broadly, depending on what component can help you figure out what to do.
So have you had any issues before where you have somebody from the best of intention is coming into the situation wrong, and how do you handle or how have you handled in the past kind of fixing the relationship that's harmed and kind of righting the wrongs? How have you handled that as an organizer?
Absolutely. There's a number of situations where there have been strained relationships historically where folks enter the community, they did not take the time to build authentic relationships. They did not take the time to understand what the community needs were. And so I would sometimes have organizers that would then need to enter that community with that history. A lot of it's just really being honest about that and just like, you know, very respectfully taking responsibility of like any past harm that's been done and saying, you know, it's unfortunate that that occurred. You know, organizationally, that's not something that we want to be doing. We want to be an organization that's constantly learning and growing and respecting other folks' needs and cultural differences. And so being honest, I think, is the first step. I think the second step is also recognizing that because of that, like we might not be able to engage in the way that we want to moving forward. And that has to be okay. Like if we were not appropriate in the past, and then other groups are like, well, actually, we don't need your support, or we don't want you to engage in this way. Like we have to also acknowledge that there may be some healing that would need to take place or some additional things that we need to do in order to get back to what's needed in order to truly work in coalition. But yeah, that's definitely occurred. I mean, it's a learning process, like encouraging people to take like a lot of self-reflection about how folks show up in different spaces is a part of that. So recognizing like if you're taking up too much space and not allowing other people to talk, also recognizing like how much leadership and power we might hold, right? Like we might be holding a particular leadership role in our community, and then because of that, we're not allowing other voices to participate over time. So there's a lot of things that we can do to create a healthier environment so that people feel safe and people want to be a part of what we're doing.
Did you see the question that just came up?
Yeah, how much effort do we put ongoing from a micro issue such as the trash steam plant built in a neighborhood to the macro level of structural racism? I mean, yeah, we try and address all aspects of it for sure. So on one hand, we want to, you know, support that local campaign and try and prevent, you know, as much as possible the continuation of any harmful environmental thing happening in the community for sure. But then like we also want to have ongoing trainings about racism, like white supremacist culture and things like that. Like we want to definitely provide opportunities for people to grow and learn and like identify when their behaviors are showing up, both like internally within meetings, but also like externally in other spaces we're in, how that can cause harm. So yeah, we definitely want to do that and provide support for people through trainings that either Sierra Club offers. There's a lot of other nonprofit organizations that provide a whole variety of trainings on racial justice issues, and we encourage staff and volunteer members to continue to participate in those trainings. But I think the biggest impact, like outside of the training, so folks, sometimes they attend a lot of those trainings and they have a hard time figuring out, oh, now that I've got all this information, like how do I actually integrate that into my work? And I think the easiest way to do that would be to not make this a separate thing. So not say, oh, for a period of time, we're going to work on this environmental justice issue with that one environmental justice community over there. I think really trying to look at our work through a lens of trying to understand, you know, like, is my work actually mostly impacting folks that have a lot of privilege, or does my work actually lift up communities that don't have a lot of privilege and have a lot of different challenges, and really trying to figure out like, how am I actually spending my time? Or, you know, am I always working in spaces that are heavily resourced, whether that's financially resourced or have access to a lot of things, versus like, how can I use my resources to help other communities? So I think really constantly asking those questions helps turn it from something that's more abstract to something that's really real. And then figuring out, like, when I show up even in meetings on a daily basis, like, am I being authentic in that showing up? Am I inviting people into my space, you know, just so I can say that I've now brought in a person who's different? Or like, is my intention not to just bring them in so that it can be more diverse, but is my intention to actually partner and learn from that person, or partner and learn from that group and create something together, instead of bringing them into this thing that I feel like I have a lot of knowledge about and they should just join what I've got going on.
So if anybody else has any questions, you can put them in the chat. While anybody's thinking about that, I do want to take a minute to thank you very much for joining with us. I do know you have another meeting. It's obviously a very busy time of year to be working on things involving the environment. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and please drop them in the chat. And barring that, I think we don't want to take up too much of your time. So I really appreciate you being able to jump on the Zoom and chat with us a little bit about how to work in these spaces. Very, very helpful.
No problem. I can share it with you, Dustin, but Sierra Club has a equity, diversity, and inclusion department. And so they have a ton of resources related to how to go about doing this work. But yeah, I think some of the best resources are actually within the communities where we work, maybe just in spaces that we just haven't engaged in very deeply. And folks have been doing the work for a really long time, but they might not be Sierra Club folks. And so a lot of it's like stepping out of our comfort zones and recognizing that a lot of the knowledge and wisdom is in communities and rest in people who maybe we don't have relationships with, and figuring out how to go about doing that.
Yeah, so that was the one thing I did want to ask. Cindy asked how we can access that community dialogue toolkit.
Yes, I can.
Something you can share?
Yes, I can try and get that to you. I'm trying to think. I don't know if they're sharing it broadly, like it can be like a PDF. I know that they're encouraging people to go through a training and then be able to host community dialogue. So I'm not sure if you access the whole toolkit after you've participated in the training, but I can definitely find out where that would be and how to obtain the toolkit for community dialogues. Yep.
Yeah. I think if you have time for one more question, it's actually come up a lot. I think the question here is how do you balance the fact that we have to build these relationships, we have to educate ourselves and learn the historical context, but still move forward in the sense of urgency that we have on a lot of these issues?
Yes, I think, okay. So I feel like I get this question quite a few times. As a person who has worked in a lot of different communities that do have a lot of intersectionality, and so they've actually been grappling with very serious issues for years, right? Issues of poverty, racism, just you name it, just really serious issues for a number of years. I think the urgency has always been there, right? And so I think these communities are actually very good at understanding how to work in an environment where there might be a lot of scarcity, an environment where there is a lot of crisis, violence or different things happening on a daily basis. And so I would say to figure out how to be resilient or to work through very difficult times where it feels like there might be a lot of urgency and panic, but to do that with grace and to do that with patience would involve, again, kind of going to those communities and looking at them to see how they've been dealing. And that would be my advice, because I think as everyone has seen with COVID-19, like this is definitely exposed a lot of what have been ongoing crises in a number of communities for a number of years and has heightened those crises. So, those communities have, people who've been on the front lines and have been fighting those issues for years. They have people who have had generations upon generations of folks who have been either advocating for reform with those issues or just finding their own solutions internally and creating spaces of mutual aid and not relying on larger infrastructures of organizations and groups to get the job done. So I would say, look to those spaces and those communities and you will find a lot of different tools for being resilient and patient and figuring out how to continue to be kind and human during times like these.
And perhaps going back to what you had said a little bit earlier, in that not going into a community with a plan, but going in to listen and be present and find out what resources you can offer to what they're already doing might help kind of resolve some of that issue that you feel the urgency, right?
Got it. And I see there's more questions.
I know you do have to run.
One more.
Okay.
Yeah, I could take one more and then I'm gonna try and go. I'm trying to reschedule my 3 o'clock if possible because I want to try and be as present with y'all as I can because this is a very important topic. Maybe I'll take the giving an example of a challenge. I need more specificity there, a challenge in environmental justice and how you worked it out. I mean, there's a number of examples related to that. And again, it's a learning experience. So I think one of the things that we've definitely been learning is just we feel like we're in community and then we realize that we're not. And so, you know, it goes back to that authentic relationships, right? So oftentimes we'll enter into a space and build relationships with folks, but the intention is because we're there to maybe do a campaign or we're there for a particular outcome. But like thinking about how do we build relationships that are not only outcome driven, because the outcomes will come, but the relationship is really what is bringing folks together and keeping people engaged with it for the long term, right? So I mean, that's a challenge we constantly have to overcome of like not feeling like we're just having a transactional relationship with someone of like, oh, I'm having this phone conversation with you, but ultimately it's because I need you to sign this petition or I need you to do this thing, but like really actually like knowing the person, supporting them in things outside of what that outcome might be in a genuine way, and building community that can exist outside of a campaign that actually looks like a community, it actually looks like neighbors, it actually looks like friends, I think is really powerful.
Wonderful. Man, I think we
Okay.
just have some great so I will let you go. I know you got a lot of important work to do. And I, again, just want to thank you so much for taking some time out today and speaking with us on this very important issue. I know as organizers and environmental advocates that want to do the best that we can do, it's really important to have this kind of context of things that have went well and knowing how to do it right. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good luck with everything. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.